1 and 2, that's how many German tank crew members said the bazooka was their most feared weapon. An 8-year German veteran told American interrogators that bazookas terrified them more than fighter bombers, more than artillery, more than mines. The bazooka, a simple tube that 2 soldiers could carry, and it was killing German tankers by the thousands. In May 1945, captured German generals sat down for interviews. Heinz Guderian, Leo Jaeger von Schweppenberg, Sepp Dietrich, Paul Hauser, all of them tank commanders. All of them asked the same question. What weapon did your crews fear most? Multiple German officers specifically named the American bazooka. One veteran tank commander couldn't forget the psychological terror. The way bazooka teams would hide, wait, then destroy million-dollar tanks with a 3-pound rocket. This is why German tank crews learned to fear American infantry more than they feared enemy tanks. Let's be clear about something first. The bazooka wasn't the most powerful anti-tank weapon of World War II. The German Panzer IV was bigger. The Panzer IV was cheaper to make. British PIAT launchers had their own advantages, but American bazooka teams had something the Germans couldn't counter: training, discipline, and numbers. Every American infantry battalion had 29 bazookas. That's 29 two-man teams, 58 soldiers whose only job was killing tanks. The Germans didn't train ordinary infantry to use Panzer IVs. They were too scarce, too expensive. Most German soldiers who picked up a Panzer IV had never fired one. They got maybe 5 minutes of instruction before going into combat. American bazooka teams trained for months. They practiced on moving targets. They learned to judge distance. They understood armor's weak points. They knew exactly where to aim. And that training created a weapon German tank crews couldn't predict, couldn't avoid, and couldn't survive. Now here's the critical part. German tankers knew American bazookas existed. They'd seen them in North Africa in 1942. They'd captured them in Tunisia in 1943. German intelligence studied everyone. They measured the rocket diameter, tested the penetration, calculated the effective range. They even copied the design to make the Panzer IV. So German tank commanders knew exactly what the bazooka could and couldn't do. They knew the M1 bazooka could penetrate 3 inches of armor. They knew the M9 could punch through 4 inches. They knew the effective range was about 90 yards. What they didn't know was where the next bazooka team was hiding, and that uncertainty killed them. Picture this. You're a German tank commander in Normandy, July 1944. Your Panzer IV is moving through a narrow French village, stone buildings on both sides, hedgerows everywhere, visibility maybe 30 yards. You know American infantry is in the area. You know they have bazookas, but you can't see them. They could be in any building, behind any wall, in any ditch. Your tank has armor that can stop most American tank shells from the front, but bazooka teams don't attack from the front. They wait for you to pass. Then they hit your thin side armor or your even thinner rear armor. One shot, one 3-pound rocket, and your 45-ton tank becomes a steel coffin. This happened thousands of times. German after-action reports describe it the same way every time. Tank advances, no warning, explosion, fire. The crew tries to bail out. Most don't make it, but here's where it gets worse. Bazooka teams didn't work alone. American infantry tactics integrated bazookas into every combat operation. When tanks moved forward, bazooka teams moved with them. When infantry assaulted a position, bazooka teams provided fire support. When Americans set up defensive positions, bazooka teams covered the approaches. This created overlapping fields of fire. A German tank couldn't advance without exposing itself to multiple bazooka positions, and the Americans placed their teams intelligently. One team would be visible, draw attention, maybe even fire and miss, while 2 more teams waited in concealment. The German tank would spot the first team, turn to engage, and expose its side to the hidden teams. Both teams would fire simultaneously. 2 rockets, different angles, at least one would penetrate. The tank would brew up. That's what tankers called it, brewing up. When ammunition exploded and turned the interior into an inferno. Stanley Sislowski served with the Canadian 5th Armored Division. He watched German Panzer IV teams destroy Canadian tanks in Normandy. He wrote that both sides feared these weapons. He described passing 2 destroyed Sherman tanks. The front tank's turret had been blown completely off. It was lying several yards away. He said this showed the destructive power of shape-charged rockets. But here's what's important. German Panzer IV teams had the same problem American bazooka teams solved. They lacked training. They lacked ammunition for practice. They lacked coordination with other units. So even though the Panzer IV was more more powerful American bazookas were more effective in combat because of how they were used. The numbers prove this. Between June 1944 and May 1945, the U.S. First Army lost 797 medium tanks and 101 light tanks. Trevor Dupay analyzed these losses in 1990. Infantry anti-tank rockets caused 13% of all tank losses, but those rockets caused 21% of all crew casualties. Think about that. Rockets destroyed fewer tanks than guns, but they killed more crew members. Why? Because shaped charge warheads create massive internal damage. When a bazooka rocket penetrates armor, it doesn't just make a hole. It creates a jet of superheated metal moving at thousands of feet per second. This jet slices through anything inside the tank. Ammunition, fuel, equipment, people. The metal vaporizes, creates fragments, burns everything. Crew members near the impact point die instantly. Others die from burns, from shrapnel, from fires. Only 40% of destroyed tanks caught fire, but crew casualties were evenly split between burning and non-burning tanks. That means even tanks that didn't burn still killed their crews. Now let's talk about what actually happened when a bazooka hit a German tank. The gunner aims for the side, or the rear, or the engine compartment. He fires. The rocket travels at 265 feet per second. The time to target at 90 yards is about 1 second. The crew inside hears nothing, see nothing. Then the warhead hits. The shaped charge detonates, creates a focused jet that burns through the armor in milliseconds. Inside the tank, the jet appears as a white hot stream. It hits whatever's behind the impact point. If it hits ammunition, the tank explodes immediately. Turrets can be thrown 30 feet in the air. If it hits the engine, fire spreads throughout the rear compartment. Fuel ignites. Smoke fills the crew compartment. If it hits crew space directly, men die before they can react. Survivors have maybe 10 seconds to escape. That's how long it takes for a tank to become unsurvivable after a catastrophic hit. 10 seconds to undo harnesses, open hatches, climb out while the interior is filled with smoke, while ammunition is cooking off, while your friends are screaming. German tank crews knew all this. They'd seen it happen. They'd pulled wounded men from destroyed tanks. They'd watched crews burn. So they developed countermeasures. They added spare track links to their tank sides, extra armor, sandbags, logs, concrete, wire mesh, anything to create a standoff distance between the warhead and the actual armor. The theory was sound. Shaped charges need to detonate at a specific distance from armor to achieve maximum penetration. If you can make them detonate too far away, they lose effectiveness. The problem was that these improvised armor additions didn't work. Tests showed you needed at least 3 feet of air gap to significantly reduce bazooka penetration. Sandbags gave you maybe 6 inches. Track links gave you 2 inches, not enough. Meanwhile, the added weight stressed the engine, overloaded the transmission, wore out the suspension. German Panthers already had mechanical problems. Adding 2 tons of sandbags made those problems worse. So German tankers had a choice: keep the improvised armor and break down more often, or remove it and face bazookas with standard armor. Either way, they died. Here's something most people don't know. German tank losses weren't evenly distributed across the war. They got worse every year. In 1942 and 1943, German tanks dominated. Superior training, better tactics, good mechanical reliability. By 1944, everything changed. Allied air power increased. American tank destroyers improved. And every American infantry unit had trained bazooka teams. General Paul Hauser commanded SS Panzer forces in France. When interrogated after the war, he said 50% of German tank losses came from anti-tank weapons, only 20% from air attacks, only 15% from artillery. The anti-tank weapons he was talking about: tank destroyers and bazookas. Multiple German generals specifically named American tank destroyers and bazookas as the weapons their crews feared most. More than Tiger tanks, more than Panthers, more than German 88mm guns. They feared American infantry with bazookas. Let's look at specific battles. Normandy Bocage Country, June to August 1944. The terrain was perfect for bazooka teams. Narrow lanes between hedgerows, limited visibility, lots of cover. American infantry would set ambushes, wait for German armor to enter the kill zone, then hit them from multiple directions simultaneously. At the Battle of St. Lo in July 1944, American infantry destroyed multiple German tanks with bazookas in close combat. The German Panzer Lehr Division reported heavy losses to American infantry infantry anti-tank weapons. During Operation Cobra, the American breakout from Normandy, bazooka teams destroyed dozens of German tanks trying to block American advances. The Germans couldn't mount effective counterattacks. Every time they concentrated armor, American bazooka teams would be waiting in concealment. But the psychological impact was even more important than the physical damage. German tank commanders had to change their tactics completely. They couldn't advance through villages anymore. Too many hiding places for bazooka teams. They couldn't move at night, couldn't see bazooka teams until too late, couldn't use roads. Roads funneled tanks into predictable paths. They had to move cross-country, which slowed them down, which exposed them to air attack, which wore out their transmissions. They had to keep infantry close for protection. But German infantry was increasingly made up of poorly trained replacements. Old men, teenagers, men who'd never seen combat. They couldn't protect the tanks effectively. So German tankers felt increasingly isolated, vulnerable. Every engagement could be their last, and they knew it. One German veteran described the terror of advancing past American lines. He said you never knew where the bazookas were. You'd hear them fire, distinctive swoosh sound. By the time you heard it, the rocket was already in the air, already coming for you. You couldn't see it, couldn't track it, couldn't shoot it down. You just waited, hoped it missed. If you heard the impact on your tank, you had maybe a second to realize you were hit, then fire, then death. He said this constant threat was worse than actual combat. The waiting, the uncertainty, the knowledge that a single infantryman hiding in a ditch could kill your entire crew without warning. Here's another factor people forget. Tank crews are 5 men: gunner, loader, driver, bow gunner, commander. When a bazooka penetrates, it usually kills or wounds multiple crew members. The shape charged, it doesn't stop after hitting one person. It keeps going, passes through equipment, through bodies. It creates secondary fragments, sets fires, so a single rocket can kill 3 or 4 men instantly. The survivors are usually wounded, burns, shrapnel, blast injuries. They can't operate the tank alone. They have to abandon it, leave their wounded friends, hope someone finds them before they bleed out. German medical evacuation was deteriorating by late 1944. Wounded tank crews often bled to death waiting for help. American medics sometimes found German tankers hours after their tanks were hit, still alive, still trapped inside, still burning. Now compare this to German anti-tank weapons. The Panzer IV was powerful, could penetrate 5.5 inches of armor, more than any American tank had. But German infantry didn't have the training to use them effectively. Most Panzer IV operators fired once in their entire military career, in combat, under fire, at a moving target. From a range they'd never practiced. Hit rates were terrible. German military records show Panzer IVs accounted for only 6% of British tank losses in Normandy despite the close-range terrain. That percentage increased later, reached 34% by 1945. Why? Because there were more Panzer IVs available and fewer German anti-tank guns, not because German soldiers got better at using them. Meanwhile, American bazooka teams maintained consistent hit rates throughout the war. Training made the difference. The Americans also developed specialized tactics. They'd use white phosphorus smoke rounds to blind German tanks. The smoke would make tank crews think their engine was on fire. They'd panic, bail out, abandon a perfectly functional tank. American infantry would then advance and destroy the abandoned tank with bazookas. Multiple German generals specifically mentioned white phosphorus as a feared weapon, more feared than airplanes. The smoke created psychological terror. Tank crews couldn't see, couldn't breathe, thought they were dying. They'd evacuate even when their tank was undamaged. This tactic worked because German tankers already expected to die in their tanks. They'd seen too many crews burn, so any sign of fire triggered immediate panic. American bazooka teams also worked closely with tanks. Sherman tanks would advance with infantry support. The infantry carried bazookas. When German tanks appeared, American Shermans would engage from the front, draw attention, while bazooka teams maneuvered to flank positions. They'd hit German tanks from the side while German crews focused on the American tanks. This combined arms approach was devastatingly effective. German tanks couldn't defend against threats from multiple directions. They'd focus on the visible threat, the American tanks, and die to the invisible threat, the bazooka teams. Irving Bromberg was a Sherman tank bow gunner. He said his crew preferred infantry support to armor support. Infantry carried bazookas, could see threats tanks couldn't see, didn't draw as much fire. The infantry was glad glad to see tanks. Tanks were glad to see infantry. This mutual support made both more effective. Here's something that really captures German fear of bazookas. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, German SS troops captured American Sherman tanks. They used these captured tanks to infiltrate American lines. Why? Because German tank crews feared American bazookas so much they'd rather drive an enemy tank than their own. They knew American sentries wouldn't immediately fire at a Sherman, would hesitate, give them time to get close. When they drove captured Shermans toward American roadblocks, they feared the moment when Americans would realize the deception, feared the bazooka fire that would destroy them. That fear was justified, but their tactic worked initially because American soldiers also hesitated to shoot what looked like friendly tanks. This shows how central the bazooka was to American anti-tank defense. German troops assumed every American position had bazookas, assumed they'd face immediate rocket fire, assumed they'd die if detected, so they went to extreme lengths to avoid being recognized as German. The Germans tried to develop their own equivalent. The Panzer IV was good technically. 88mm warhead could penetrate over 8 inches of armor, 216mm in some tests, more powerful than any bazooka, but it had problems. The rocket motor kept burning after leaving the tube, produced massive smoke clouds, revealed the team's position instantly. The backblast required operators to wear protective gear, gas masks, heavy ponchos. This made the weapon awkward, slow to use. Meanwhile, American bazooka teams could fire from enclosed positions, didn't produce as much smoke, could relocate faster. The Americans also had better logistics, more rockets available, more replacement launchers, better training facilities. So even though German weapons were theoretically superior, American weapons were more effective in practice. By 1945, the situation was desperate for German tankers. Allied air superiority was total. Tank destroyers were everywhere. Every American infantry unit had bazookas. Every engagement was a potential death sentence. German tank crews knew they were going to die. It was just a question of when. Some generals reported mechanical failures accounted for 60 to 70% of tank losses on the Eastern Front. But in France, anti-tank weapons were the biggest killer. 50% of losses, and bazookas were a significant part of that. The psychological damage was immense. Tank crews who survived one battle knew they probably wouldn't survive the next. This affected morale, affected performance, affected willingness to fight. Some crews abandoned their tanks at the first sign of trouble. Better to surrender than burn. Let's put this in perspective. The M9A1 bazooka weighed 15 pounds, length 61 inches. It costs about $200 to manufacture. A German Panzer IV tank weighed 25 tons. It cost about $100,000, required months to build, needed 5 trained crew members. One bazooka team with a 3-pound rocket could destroy a 40-ton tank, could kill 5 men, could eliminate $100,000 of equipment in seconds from concealment at minimal risk. This cost-effectiveness terrified German commanders. They couldn't replace tanks as fast as Americans could destroy them, couldn't train crews fast enough, couldn't maintain mechanical reliability under combat conditions. The bazooka represented everything Germany feared about American industrial warfare. Simple, cheap, effective, mass-produced, everywhere. General Eisenhower called the bazooka one of 4 tools of victory that won World War II. The other 3 were the atomic bomb, the Jeep, and the C-47 transport plane. That's how important he considered it, not because it was the most powerful weapon, but because it gave ordinary infantry the ability to destroy tanks, changed the balance of combat, made tank attacks far more dangerous, forced German armor to operate cautiously, slowed their advances, disrupted their tactics, created constant psychological pressure, and killed thousands of German tankers who never saw the team that fired at them. Here's what German tankers said in their own words. One captured officer told interrogators that bazookas were more feared than fighter bombers. Another said the constant threat of bazooka ambushes made every movement terrifying. A third described passing through French villages as suicide missions. Everyone knew bazooka teams were hiding somewhere. Nobody knew where, nobody knew when they'd fire. This uncertainty was psychologically crushing. German doctrine emphasized aggressive armor tactics, rapid advances, bold maneuvers. But you can't be aggressive when every street corner might hide a bazooka team. You can't advance rapidly when you have to clear every building. You can't maneuver maneuver boldly when any movement might expose your weak side armor. So German tankers became cautious, defensive, reactive, which meant they lost the tactical initiative, which meant they lost battles, which meant more of them died. The bazooka also enabled American infantry to defend against German counterattacks. During the Battle of the Bulge, isolated American units held out against German armor using bazookas. At Bostonia, American paratroopers destroyed German tanks with bazookas in close combat. These defenders didn't have tank support, didn't have artillery, just infantry with rifles and bazookas, but they stopped German armored spearheads, held critical positions, disrupted German timetables, all because bazooka teams could kill tanks. Without bazookas, those infantry units would have been overrun. With bazookas, they held. This changed German operational planning. They couldn't assume armor would break through infantry positions anymore, had to plan for sustained resistance, had to commit more resources, which slowed their operations, which gave Americans time to reinforce, which turned potential German victories into stalemates or defeats. One more critical factor: bazooka teams operated at every level: battalion, company, platoon, sometimes even squad level. This meant German tanks faced bazooka threats constantly, couldn't relax, couldn't assume safety even in rear areas. American infantry infiltrated German lines, set up ambush positions, waited for supply convoys, for command tanks, for tank recovery vehicles, then destroyed them with bazookas. This disrupted German logistics, made it harder to maintain tanks, made it harder to move supplies forward, created constant insecurity throughout German rear areas. Tank crews never felt safe. Even miles behind the front lines, a bazooka team might be hiding, waiting. This constant threat wore down morale faster than actual combat. So 75%, that's not U-boats. That's German tanks that were lost to non-mechanical causes in France in 1944 and 1945. 50% of those came from anti-tank weapons, tank destroyers and bazookas. The rest from air attacks and artillery. But German generals specifically named bazookas as one of the most feared weapons, right alongside tank destroyers, because bazookas were everywhere, unpredictable, deadly, and operated by well-trained teams who knew exactly how to kill tanks. This fear changed how Germany fought, made their tank tactics defensive, cautious, reactive, which meant they lost the initiative, which meant they lost battles, which meant they lost the war. Here's the devastating summary. Between 1944 and 1945, American bazooka teams destroyed or damaged thousands of German tanks. Exact numbers are hard to confirm because many kills were shared with other weapons, but post-war analysis shows infantry anti-tank rockets caused 13% of American tank losses when used by Germans. American bazooka teams were more effective than German Panzer IV teams because of better training, so they likely caused similar or higher percentages of German losses. At minimum, hundreds of German tanks, probably over 1,000. Each tank lost meant 5 crew members killed or wounded. That's at least 5,000 German tankers killed or wounded by American bazookas. Most died in fires, most never got out of their tanks, most never saw the team that killed them. This tells us something important about how World War II was actually fought. It wasn't glorious. It wasn't honorable. It was industrial killing on a massive scale. America built 475,000 bazookas, over 15 million rockets, trained tens of thousands of two-man teams, placed those teams in every infantry unit, created a distributed anti-tank capability that German armor couldn't overcome, couldn't avoid it, couldn't survive. That's not war as we see it in movies. That's systematic application of mass-produced weapons by well-trained infantry against expensive, vulnerable armored vehicles. And it worked. German tank crews learned to fear American infantry more than they feared American tanks, because infantry carried bazookas, and bazookas killed tanks. Here's the number that says it all. In May 1945, multiple captured German generals were interviewed, asked what weapons their tank crews feared most. Multiple officers specifically named the American bazooka, alongside tank destroyers. More than fighter bombers, more than artillery, more than mines, the bazooka. A simple tube, a 3-pound rocket, and the training to use it effectively. That's what broke German armored operations in France. That's what killed thousands of German tankers. That's what made every advance terrifying. That's what changed how tank warfare was fought. Those aren't just combat statistics. Those are the reasons German tank crews feared American infantry. Thanks for watching. watching. Next time, we're covering why American B-17 bomber crews had a 1 in 4 chance of not completing their 25-mission tour. The survival statistics are even more brutal. If you want more real World War II combat data that shows what the war was actually like, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment with which deadly role you want us to cover next. See you in the next one.